Alright guys, so we're going to start working on rational numbers, solving rational numbers, especially on a number line. One thing that I want to point out that I had a few people kind of confused about was that when you're plotting a number line, for the most part, we're all familiar with the typical number line where you have your line and you have your zero, and then you'd split between positives. You got positives on one side, negatives on the other. So you got 1, 2, 3. Then on the other side, you have -1, -2, -3. So we're all familiar with your typical number line. Pretty straightforward. Positives on one side, negatives on the other. But I'm trying to get, what I'm trying to relay is that there's also numbers in between. So in between 0 and 1 and 2 and 3, there's also numbers. It's parts of numbers. So if we look at this number line on this side, we can see here that you have 1 here. You have 0 here and 1 and 2. But if you look in between, we have different parts of numbers. So what I did, for example, is I went ahead and I broke it down into 4 different parts. You can actually break down these number lines into an infinite of parts. So in between 0 and 1, there is an infinite amount of pieces that you can break it up into. So you can break it up into 4s, you can break it up into 8s, etc., etc. So what I did was I broke it up into 4s. So I have 4 equal parts. I got 1, 2, 3, 4 equal parts with in between 0 and 1. And if you notice, if you look at the denominator right here, which is the bottom number, the denominator is going to tell you how many parts are between 0 and 1. So I have 1/4, which is just this little sliver right here. So between 0 and 1/4, you have this small little sliver of space. And that's just, and then 1/4. And then you have 2/4, with 2/4 could also be, 2/4 can also be 1/2. If I were to divide the top and bottom by 2, I would get 1/2. So if you notice, 2/4 or 1/2, which is the same thing, it's right in the middle. It's in the exact middle of 0 and 1. And then to the right, I have 3/4, and then 1, which can also be, you can also write 1 as 4/4, means the exact same thing. You have 1. So just remember, guys, it's not just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., etc. You also have pieces of a number within a number. Now, if we look at the numbers between 1 and 2, this section right here, I also split this up into 4 separate sections as notated by the denominator. You have 1 and 1/4, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4. So all these are pieces of this of 1. So if I had, for example, if I had 1 full candy bar, all right, so I'm gonna illustrate that by between 1 and 2, it's between 0 and 1, it's 1 full candy bar. Between 1 and 2 is another full candy bar. If I were to go ahead and break apart one of the candy bars in half and eat 1/2 of the candy bar, I only have 1 and 1/2 candy bar left over, as you can see here. See, so if I only had 1 and 1/2 candy bar left over, I can easily see that on the number line if I were to plot it. Another thing to remember is that just like fractions, decimals mean the exact same thing. So for example, you have your 0 in the middle, and then your 0.25 is equivalent to 1/4 of a whole. And then you have 0.50 is the same thing as 2/4 or 1/2 of a whole. 0.75 is the same thing as 3/4 of a whole. And another way to kind of remember with decimals is you can also see it as money. So you can see it as 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents, and $1. So if I tell you find me, let's see, 1.25, you can also read that as $1.25, and you just go over to the number line. You go over past the 1 and a little bit into the 2, which is right there, and that would signify, you can say it's like $1.25, but it's 1.25, same as 1 1/4. So guys, this is just to kind of illustrate that there's more to a number line than just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and -1, -2, -3. There's more to a number line. Now, let's go ahead and take it to the next step and do a few problems that will allow us to actually use the number line in solving not only decimal problems, but problems with fractions in them and mixed numbers as well. So here I have 3.5 plus 2.5. The way I'm going to start is by setting up my number line. Since I can see that it's a positive numbers on both sides, I'm going to move my 0 a little bit to the side. That way I have room on the right to kind of write my numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and construct my number line. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and construct my number line. And then in the middle, see, I'm dealing with halves. See, so 3.5 and 2.5 are both halves. So I'm just going to construct my number line with halves. So here I have, in between 0 and 1, I have 0.5. And then in between 1 and 2, I have 1.2. In between 2 and 3, I have 2.5. Oops, my mistake. I'm sorry. This was supposed to be a 5. There we go. Sorry about that. So 0.5. In between 1 and 2, I have 1.5. In between 2 and 3, I have 2.5. In between 3 and 4, I have 3.5. In between 4 and 5, I have 4.5. Okay. And then now, I'm going to go ahead and start solving my problem. So first, when we add, in addition, we first want to kind of find where our 3.5 is located. So our 3.5 is right here. So here's my 3.5. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little dot over my 3.5, which is located in between 3 and 4. Now, it wants me to go 2.5 spaces to the right. So I'm going to the right because I'm adding a positive. So I'm going to go 2.5 spaces to the right. First, I'm going to go 2 spaces to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and go 1, 2, and I'm going to have to extend this a little bit because I made my number line a little too short. So let me go ahead and put right here, this is 5.5. I'm going to have to move into this number line, kind of 5.5. I'm going to put here 6, and then I'll go ahead and put 6.5, etc. Okay, let's see if I have enough now. So I have here, I moved it 1 space, 2 spaces, 3 spaces, and a half a space. Notice that's a smaller hump. So check out what I did. So of course my answer is going to be, I think I went, let me see, I went too many. Oh, my mistake. Let me go ahead and, it went too many spaces. So I was supposed to go 1, 2 and a half. So I should have actually stopped on the 6. So I apologize for that. All right, so let's go ahead and erase all that. See, you guys, that's why you use pencil and eraser in class, because when you make a mistake, then you have this giant mess on the paper. All right, so what I did was I started on 3.5. Now, one common misconception I've noticed that some people will go from 3.5 to 4 and then count that as a whole. But no, that would actually be just half a jump, because from 3.5 to 4, that's just half a jump. I need to go a whole jump. So by going a whole jump, I'm going from 3.5 to 4.5, from 4.5 to 5.5, and from 5.5, I'm going to take my half jump down up to 6. And 6 will be my final answer. Let's do this one. This one right here is going to incorporate some negatives. So I'm going to try to make my number line a little bit smaller, because since I had this little mistake earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and construct my number line. I'm noticing that I have some quarters here. So I have 2.5. So I have -2 and a quarter, or 1/4 of a whole. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to try to split these into fourths, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my 1, 2, 3, and then again on this side, -1, -2, -3, and then I'm going to try to split this up into 4s. So I have 4 equal parts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me make this line a little bit more bold. Make this one a little bit more bold, that way you can actually see it better. So in between here I have 1, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, and 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. All right. There we go. And you notice, guys, what I'm doing here is that I'm customizing my number line depending on what the problem states. So on this one, since I was just adding halves, then I'm not gonna make such an elaborate number line like this one. On this one, I'm actually adding quarters, so -2.25, that's a quarter, and then 2.75, that's 3/4 of a whole. So with this one, I'm going to go ahead and start on -2.25. So I'm going to find my -2, and I know -2.25 is in between -2 and -3. So here, right here, I'm going to have -2, and then I'm going to have -2.25, and then this one is -2.50, and then this one's -2.75, and then I got -3. So I'm going to go ahead and put my little dot on the -2.25. I'm going to put my dot there. And now it wants me to add 2.75. And since I'm adding a positive, I'm going to go to the right. So I'm going to go ahead, and you have two options. You can either jump as a whole. So I can go ahead and jump from here to here, and that would be a whole. Or you can go from line to line. So I know that I have each whole is 4 parts. So I'm gonna have, since I have 2, that's gonna be 8 parts plus 3, because there's 3 parts 0.75 is equal to 3 out of 4 parts. So I can go to the right 8, 9, 10, 11, or I think this is much easier for us to just go ahead and jump from 2.25, so from negative 2.25 to negative, I want to go ahead to go from negative 2.25 to negative 1.25 to negative 0.25. So that I already jumped once, twice, and then I need to jump 3 more quarters. So 1 quarter, 2 quarter, 3 quarter jumps, and that'll leave me on. This would be 0.5 because it's in the middle of, since it's in the very center of 0 and 1, it's going to be 0.5, or in other words, 1/2. So you can see it either way. So what I did was I made one whole jump from 2.25 to from negative 2.25 to negative 1.25, and then I made a jump to 0.25, and then I made 3 small jumps because 0.25 plus 0.25, whoops, plus 0.25 equals 0.75. So I'm going to go ahead and have 3 small quarter jumps, and that'll land me on 1/2 or 0.5. So my answer would be 0.5 or 1.5, however you want to work that. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on this one over here. So this is, so we're looking at 1 3/4 plus 2 1/2. So basically what we're going to do with this one is we're going to create our number line. I'm sorry about that. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and I have 1 3/4 plus 2 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and create my number line. Since it's mostly positive, I'm going to start at 0 all the way to the left and go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then of course, looks like, again, I'm working with quarters. So working with quarters again, I'm going to go ahead and break up the centers in between numbers by 4s. And I'm going to go ahead and find 1 3/4. So I know it's going to be right of 1. So it's going to be in between 1 and 2. So it's 1 3/4. It's 1, 2, 3. Put a little dot here. This is 1 3/4. And it wants me to add 2 1/2. So I'm going to go to the right from 1 3/4 to 2 3/4 and jump again. I'm going to jump again to 3 3/4 and 1/2. So, and 1/2. Boom. And that's gonna stop me on 4 1/4. All right. So I did 2 whole jumps and a half jump. And the answer to that would be 4 1/4. All right, do one last example for you guys. This one is negative 1/2 plus negative 3/4. So I'm going to start my 0 all the way to the right because I'm going to be going negative. I got 1, 2, 3, 4. So I got negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4. And looks like I'm working with quarters again, so I'm gonna go ahead and split my number lines into four equal pieces per number, per whole number. All right, go ahead and split that up. Maybe bold this a little bit, that way you can see the whole number. All right. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for negative 1/2. So it's going to be closer to the 0. So negative 1/2 is going to be in between -1 and 0. So it's going to be in the very middle. It's going to be in the very middle. And it wants me to plus negative 3/4. So I'm going to go to the left because it's negative. So I'm going to go to the left. I'm going to go 3/4 to the left. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. And that would land me on -1 and 1/4. So the answer to that one is -1 and 1/4. Okay, so I started on -1/2, and I went 3/4, not 3 wholes, because I'm working with quarters here. So if you see here, I'm working with quarters because if you, whenever you're working with decimals, you know, you have 1/4, and then 2/4, and then 2/4 makes 1/2. So you can kind of see it like money. So I'm going, and then that's the same thing with fractions. This will be equivalent to 1/4 plus 1/4 equals 2/4. Or if you reduce that, 1 and 1/2. All right, so I went 3/4 to the left, 1, 2, 3/4 to the left, and that would be my answer. All right, so go ahead, and I would recommend working out some of these problems on your own and solving them, and it might help you out, especially tomorrow. So good luck.